Welcome, bienvenue, dobry dzień at our webinar Assessment for Learning, the second webinar in our series New Ideas for Assessment. We will be live on 2 platforms today. We will be here in Zoom with a multilingual webinar, and we have live streaming on YouTube in English. Before we start, I would like to give some instructions to our Zoom participants. Please note that you can choose a language, selecting a language in the bottom line of the screen under interpretation, and you can choose English, French, and Russian. Also, please select English if you're following us in English. The PowerPoint presentation today will be in English here in the streaming, but we have a Russian and French PowerPoint available on ETF Open Space, and my colleague will share the link in the chat. And one last hint, please have your mobile phone ready because we will need it later on. I think now we're ready to start, and I will start with introducing myself. My name is Jolien van Uden. I work as a specialist in vet policies and systems at the European Training Foundation, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. The aim of the webinar today is to increase the understanding of what formative assessment is and what it could do, and to illustrate this with some practices from different countries. As ETF, we took the pandemic as an opportunity to look better at assessment, summative and formative assessment, and the role of assessment. And we started with a webinar on summative assessment in May last year, as there was an immediate need to come up with solutions for end of year and final assessments, and you can still watch this video on ETF Open Space. This time we would like to focus more on formative assessment, and maybe it's even more important as formative assessment should support the learners throughout their learning process. Also, to me, it seems that formative assessment at this point is quite a hot topic. I see blogs, articles popping up on my different social media channels. Maybe it's just my social media bubble, but also when I was reading one of the Dutch newspapers last week, I read an interview with Dylan William, who is an expert and researcher on formative assessment, maybe even the expert researcher. And as an introduction to today's webinar, I would like to share 2 quotes he wrote, like he said during that interview, and I realized that I'm translating now an interview that was translated to Dutch again to English, but what he said was the following. The first quote is, "You are not smart, you become smart." And the second one, he said, "Teachers should stop giving grades, full stop." And he's really a promoter of formative assessment, formative evaluation, he calls it. And that's exactly where we would like to look at today as well. We will start today, and I think my slide should move, but let me see. Yes, the agenda of today's webinar. We will have a presentation today by Janet Looney, Director of the European Institute of Education and Social Policy, and also an expert on assessment and specifically formative assessment. And she will explain more about the concepts underpinning formative assessment. We will have time after her presentation for questions. So please, if you have any questions, suggestions, ideas, share them with us in the chat in Zoom or in the comments section on YouTube. After this presentation, we will share 4 examples with you. We have examples from Georgia, Albania, Spain, and Tunisia. And also here in between, we will have time for some questions and answering. And at the end, we would like to look forward, like what do we need to make better use of formative assessment, and also what will we do as ETF to support the use of assessment in general. Before we go to the presentation by Janet, I would like to ask you some questions. We would like to know who you are, and we will use Mentimeter to do this, so we can, both the participants from Zoom and YouTube can join us. So please go to menti.com. You can use the QR code you see on the slide. My colleagues will share the link in the chat, or you can just go to www.menti.com and use the code you see 129868 to join the room. Chiara, can we start? So the first question we have is, from which country are you following us? We would like to know who is joining us today. And I know also that in YouTube, the YouTube followers are 30 seconds behind, so we will have to wait, give them some time to reply as well. So Albania in the middle so far. Let's see whether other countries are joining us. Bosnia-Herzegovina, Egypt. What do we have in Russian, colleagues? Belarus. So let's give it a couple of more seconds. We can have more. I see we have 26 people voting so far, and we're way more. I see 90 participants. That's really great to see you all here. Wheels from me. Ah, I see that we have it in the chat as well. Kyrgyzstan. So we see that we are here together today from many different countries. Very interesting to see that. I think we need to move to the next question. With the next question, we are curious, like, who you are. What is your role? What are you doing? If you have several roles, please, you can only choose one option. So please tick the box that's what you're doing most of the time. So what do we see? We have a lot of others. Now I'm curious, if you're another, could you maybe share it in the chat? Policymakers. We have some trainers, teachers. I see the votes are still going up. I think, great. So we have around 30% teacher, trainer. We have we see consultant, journalist, deputy director, so different others, and 30%, around 30% of policymakers. But we will have to move to the next question. It's good to know who you are. So now we go to the content. And this question and also the next question is also kind of introduction to the presentation Janet will be doing. And we'd just like to get an idea of what you understand when you think about formative assessment. So formative assessment is most effective when it features more frequent tests to track learners' progress, or B, is primarily focused on providing feedback, C, is spontaneous, D, is carefully planned, or E, celebrates errors, F, is focused on helping all learners to meet learning objectives. And here it's also possible to tick multiple boxes. So we see the highest score so far is focused on helping all learners to meet learning objectives. And the second position for is primarily focused on providing feedback. Yeah, let's go to the last question because we need to go on with the presentation. Feedback is most effective when it is tied to standards and criteria. And this is feedback. The previous one was formative assessment in general. B is given by the teacher trainer. C does not provide a lot of detail. D provides specific suggestions for improvement. And E is provided within a month at the latest. And also here, possible to tick multiple answers. And we see the highest score so far for D, provides specific suggestions for improvement. I think, Janet, you got some input for your presentation. I will start sharing the presentation again. And then I would really like to ask you to tell us more about what formative assessment is and can do. And I also would like to remind all participants before I pass the floor that you can ask questions in the chat, and I will raise some of the questions after Janet finishes her presentation. So for now, I would like to pass the floor to Janet Looney, Director of the European Institute of Education and Social Policy. Jolien, over to Janet.
Okay, thank you, Jolien. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here. And I was really interested to see your responses on the Mentimeter. I think it seems like you all have at least a basic understanding of formative assessment. I was impressed that you see it as a planned kind of approach, and that is something very important to emphasize. Is carefully thought through. It can be spontaneous sometimes, but also has to be planned. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that and what formative assessment is and why it's important. So what is it? Formative assessment, it's sometimes referred to as assessment for learning. And that's as a way to distinguish it as assessment of learning. So formative assessment is intended to help identify what learners do and do not understand, and to then decide on the next steps to help move learning forward. So it is for learning, while summative assessment may be a test or an examination or an assignment that's used to make a final decision. Depending on your philosophy, it could be used for a course mark, award of a certificate, and so on. So that's assessment of learning. Yoli, may I have the next slide, please? So formative assessment engages everyone in the learning setting. That's whether it's in the classroom, an online course, or a workplace setting. It's really a holistic approach. In this planned approach, teachers and trainers may set up activities that help draw out evidence of learner understanding and provide information that may be used to provide feedback and to adapt next steps to the learning process. So really thinking about what kind of evidence is needed and how it might be drawn out. Teacher-designed activities might include a discussion, a quiz, observation of how learners are working together to address a problem, for example, in inquiry-based learning, that kind of thing. Learners are also actively engaged in assessing their own work. So they're starting to take on capacity for self-assessment, which will be important over time, and also the work of their peers. So they're learning from their peers. They're also developing competences for teamwork in the same process. It's a dynamic process, and teachers and learners adapt the next steps for learning based on information for the assessment. So the always focus is on moving learning forward. Now the next slide, please. So it's important to note that formative assessment is a criterion referenced approach. So learner performance is typically judged against a specific standard with criteria showing what levels of performance are toward that standard. So excellent, very good, needs work, etc. And these are tied to intended learning outcomes. What's important also about having a standard and looking at where the learner is that you can identify the gap in learning. And the next steps in learning are intended to help close that gap. The criterion referenced approach is also important because it ensures that everyone knows what the expectations are. No one has to guess what the teacher has in mind. And the aim is that all learners are helped to meet the standard. So it's not a competition about who's the best and the brightest, who's going to be at the top of the class, but how can every learner be helped to meet that standard? How can learning be tailored for different learner needs? As learners progress in a subject, they may also co-construct learning goals and criteria for assessment with the teacher. So it's not always handed to them, but as they get more sophisticated, or even at the beginning, they may be there talking about what the standard should be, what criteria should be. So there's a kind of a co-ownership. And then they may establish their own learning goals over time and look at how they'll assess their own progress. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide highlights different elements of formative assessment, and this is presented as a holistic and synergistic approach. So each element supports and reinforces the others. At the center, you'll see the learning environment, and this is at the center because it sets the tone for interaction. In a classroom culture where everyone has high levels of trust with the others, they're going to feel more safe to expose what they do and do not know. And this is really important because learning happens when you are able to expose those weaknesses and those errors. If you act like you know everything all the time or you don't speak up, you're not as likely to learn. So, but everyone has to feel safe to do that. And also learners are encouraged to interact and reflect on their learning as part of this culture. So it's very interactive. Everyone feels a sense of trust and a willingness to learn from each other. The second element of the model in the lower right hand of the figure is on active engagement of learners. An important aim of active engagement is to help learners develop their own strategies for learning. So they're encouraged to reflect and to develop the disciplinary habits of mind depending on what they're learning. So for example, how they're going to reflect on their mathematical learning, what kind of mathematical thinking, what kind of design thinking, what are the kinds of questions within this discipline that people need to pose. Moving clockwise, you can see the third element, which is establishment of learning or problem-solving goals. So as I mentioned just earlier, formative assessment is criterion referenced. So this here is when the learning goals are shared with everyone. So people know what's expected and how they're going to be judged. Continuing to move clockwise, the fourth element highlights the importance of varied opportunities for learning and development of both theoretical and practical competences, which is particularly important in vet learning. Not just being able to answer tests, but also to be able to put things into practice. And typically the teacher or the trainer will design tasks to support learner progression. So this will be based on a theory of how learners develop knowledge over time. What are the basics? How do they build on that over time? The fifth element highlights the importance of varied assessment approaches and tools. So this might include simple quizzes to check on learner understanding, or extended classroom dialogues and deep questioning that really get to the source of learner misconceptions, if any, where learners can help each other, where they can explore subjects in more depth. It also includes classroom observations, peer feedback, the classwork setting, and review of work done. Some of the tools might include the use of rubrics. So for example, a rubric is a table setting out the different performance levels and the criteria to meet standards. I'll also mention digital learning tools because these are becoming more and more used, and they really do expand the toolbox of what we can do. So for example, some Web 2.0 platforms allow learners to work collaboratively in a digital space, and they can give each other feedback on an e-portfolio, for example, or they might use social media to discuss issues, discussion boards on massive online open courses. Other types of digital tools like games or quizzes, serious games with ill-defined problems that students or learners try to tackle together are important. Learning anytime, anywhere, so you can go into the field and sort of interact with a learning platform while you're also in the field and observing. All of this can really feed into and help progress over time, so students can monitor their learning, the teachers can monitor their learning, and also in the way that we just used Mentimeter, sort of see where everyone is and then gauge the next steps based on that. The final element is the element of feedback. And we had some questions about that because it is sometimes assumed to be the main part of formative assessment. I've left it till the last because what I'd like to emphasize here that it is one aspect of this holistic approach. It's really most effective when it's part of that classroom culture where everyone feels safe to reveal their errors. And they've also learned how to listen and respond to feedback. So not everyone hears feedback well. They have to get used to hearing from the teacher and their peers and being able to take that information in and to use it. So that's really also part of it. As we had, and most of you also clicked on the need for suggestions for improvement. That's very important. And with as little or as much information as a learner needs to progress. And the next slide, please. Okay, so this is the last slide, actually. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. There's a longer presentation online where you can find a little bit more detail. And of course, there will be more resources and you'll hear more about putting it into practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, for explaining to us the elements, six elements of formative assessment. I think we already have some questions, so we will like to use this time you're here with us to ask you some of the questions. I have a question from Isa, if I pronounce your name correctly. Formative assessment is an integral part of the learning process. So does it assume that it has to be planned in the teacher's lesson plan, or does it come according to the context? The question was raised in French, so this is a translation.
Okay, yes. Planning is really important. But you can only plan so far with formative assessment because part of it is about adjusting next steps depending on the information you get. So there is some room for maybe planning needs to include a repertoire of potential issues that need to be addressed and some kind of contingency where things come up and you explore new areas that you might not have expected. So there's a bit of both. I think, Aisha, you've raised a really interesting and important part in your question, noting that formative assessment is integral to teaching and learning. So it's not a separate process. As you're teaching, you're also eliciting information of understanding and then moving learning forward. It's partly planned, you partly can anticipate, especially with experience, potential misconceptions, and there's always room for surprise. And it's always important to take all the different questions seriously, even if they may seem off base, because there's probably something behind it.
Thank you, Janet. I also hope that it is an answer to your question, but I think it could be a very useful approach to look at formative assessment. And there's an other question, but where do we have it? It's coming. It's the one in the chat, right, Arjen? From Merap. I have it. So the question is, would it be possible to elaborate a bit more on formative assessment in e-learning, especially considering the current pandemic where we are in?
Yeah, it's a vast subject.
Yeah,
it really is. I think what I'll choose to emphasize here is that different digital tools have different capacities and limits. or in the language of digital learning, affordances and limits. So you can do things with digital tools that you might not be able to do without them. For example, getting multiple answers through classroom polling, or setting up collaborative problem solving things, issues with virtual spaces that you wouldn't be able to do in a normal classroom discussion. Planning for formative assessment, I think, takes a careful thinking through of what tools you want to use as part of that array of different assessment tools, what kind of information they can elicit, and then how does that fit best in your planning to move learning forward. Probably having more than one kind of tool is important. One thing I've also noticed about how teachers use digital tools is it shouldn't be just about motivation, because sometimes people use it just to get energy up. It should be really to focus on a specific goal for learning, and then to follow up with that. So it's not you've done the digital tool and you're done. You also need to have a plan to follow up once you've elicited that information. And so it really is part of a whole toolbox. And you're not going to offload your formative assessment onto the tool. You're going to integrate it into your teaching and learning.
Thank you, Janet. I think you might have partly answered another question as well, because you mentioned like you need to choose the tools based on what you want to achieve, based on the learning outcomes, the process. Because we also have a question from Abdul, and he's asking whether you could recommend any specific tools online.
Well, yeah, I can't give you the names of specific programs because there are so many of them, and they all have different pros and cons. I think in vet learning, simulations are very popular. And there are some lower cost simulations that are available that don't have to go through fancy virtual reality kinds of things. But what's good about them is that you can talk through processes, show your thinking processes and your capacity to actually put that work into practice.
Thanks. I think we have time for one last question. I'm trying to translate. I see a French question in French, and I think I can translate it from Naila, and she is asking for competencies like entrepreneurial competence. Can we also talk about summative assessment, or is it better to use only formative assessment in this regard?
I'm going to translate entrepreneurship as being about creativity. And I think that's difficult to assess summatively unless you're going to look at the outcome of an entrepreneurial project, for example. But when you're looking at creativity, you probably want to define some specific criteria and different elements that you want to measure. And this is an interesting one and hard to talk about in 1 minute, but some experts in this area would look more at creative habits of mind than they would at the actual judging the project. So is the learner disciplined and persistent in pursuing a problem? Are they working together with others on the team? Are they generating a number of ideas that are appropriate for the problem? How they solve the problem with this creative approach? It's hard to answer all of that in 1 minute, but I think looking at sort of maybe habits of mind that support entrepreneurship may be where you want to be focusing, and it's more of a formative aspect than a summative aspect.
Yes, and you focus on the process more than the result, what you mentioned.
Yes.
We have way more questions, but we don't have that much time because we have also 4 interesting cases to show. But what we will do, we will save the questions and we will discuss them with Janet, and we will come back to them on ETF Open Space, where we will come up with the answers to those questions. I think that's the best solution for now, and it's great to see that there are this many questions. Yes. So it's indeed a topic where many people are thinking about, working on. So that's good to see.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Janet, for your contribution today. And we will get back with some more answers on the questions later on.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So we will now go to the examples. I think we learned all more about what formative assessment is and could be and could do. And I'm really interested to see now like how it looks like in practice. I hope you too. We have 4 examples today, and we will share them 2 by 2. So I will share 2 examples, then we will have some time for question and answering, at least 1 question for each case. Then we will move on to the next 2 examples, again 2 questions, and then we will see at the end how much time we will have left and how many questions we have left to ask more questions. We will start with an example from Georgia that shows how simulations support learning by providing immediate feedback. And for this example, my colleague Maria Lvova will interview Dr. David Songulashvili, professor at the Georgian Technical University. And he has designed several simulations to support the learning of students. And Maria, I would like to invite you to start the interview. Jolien, over to Maria. I think we can't hear. There's no sound. We will. We have a slight technical issue, but we will get there. We will get in Georgia. It's far from Italy.
Сегодня у нас в гостях профессор из Грузии, который разработал... Расскажите нам, пожалуйста, почему вы создали этот театр, как он выглядит?
Есть 2 вида. Один вариант — это когда мы чисто виртуальное лаборатория, виртуальном мире, чтобы на переднем плане был сразу физика и математика не работает. Значит, ее надо понять. Потом математику использовать как инструмент, а не наоборот, чтобы формулы выводить и не понимать, что ты делаешь. Вот. А потом второй вариант — это не чисто виртуальный, а реально виртуальная лаборатория с реальными объектами, делать эксперименты в реальном мире, но одновременно происходит. Вот это очень важно. В первую очередь, это стимуляция для того, чтобы правильно понять и объяснить все физические процессы, которые происходят в разных устройствах и на переднем плане вынести это, потом оценивать правильно действия учеников, студентов и так далее, потому что это самое важное. Ты можешь объяснить и потом, какой критерий дается для того, чтобы понять, насколько студент разобрался, потому что тест не дает правильных результатов. Там надо выбрать из там, какой правильный ответ. Или интуитивно можно кликнуть так на правильный, или просто так по выбору и будет попасть. А в этом случае ты имеешь точное определение, действительно ли он разобрался в этом или нет. И, кроме того, здесь другие навыки возникают, потому что он может виртуально с разными приборами научиться соответствовать электричеству. Потом эта лаборатория имеет другое продолжение. Она может связаться с реальным миром. И уже в реальном мире вы производите разные эксперименты, но все процессы. Я вам сейчас приведу пример. конкретная лаборатория действует и как она пишет оценки. Есть два варианта. Один вариант, когда сама программа задает тебе какие-то вопросы, порциями задает эти вопросы, и на каждый вопрос ты не только отвечаешь, но ты еще должен разобраться вот этой, скажем, в данной ситуации в электричестве. Ты должен уметь работать с этими приборами, и она все это оценивает. Я сейчас начну прямо здесь, то вы с нами. Ну, надо понимать, что у нас очень большое сопротивление. Так, таким образом. Я сейчас измерил, написал правильный ответ. И тут же она программа дала мне правильную оценку, вот вы здесь видите, и дала другое задание. Теперь я должен собрать цвет, написать формулу, то, что от меня требуется, и уже должен. Вот я сейчас неправильно сделаю. Вот говорил предохранитель, абсолютно реальная ситуация. Разобраться, в чем дело, снова. И требуется от меня определить минимальное и максимальное сопротивление вот этого. Ток амперметром, значит, калькулятор. И все эти оценки, я сейчас один правильный ответ сделаю. Ну, получил хорошую оценку и второй правильно написал. Вот программа мне зафиксировала одну ошибку, исправила результат и сказала, вот этот ответ, но не остановилась на этом месте. И дала новое задание. И так далее. Она полностью дает задание, и каждый отдельно оценивает. В конце концов, я получу какое-то количество положительных, какое количество. Самое главное, она не просто мне дает отрицательное, но она указывает на правильно. Значит, если я второй раз попытаюсь это сделать, я обязательно получу ручей. Это один вариант, когда программа сама оценивает и сама дает результат. Второй, когда эта программа записывает наши действия и передает это все учителю.
Давид, расскажите, пожалуйста, а как преподаватель может понять, что обучающийся усваивает материал? Как он может понять, где проблема? Есть ли у вас какое-то решение для этого?
Обязательно. Я вам продемонстрирую. Становится всего то, что происходит, значит, дано мне фокусное расстояние, дано какой предмет, высота предмета, и мне надо определить высоту изображения. По заданию я 5 сантиметров фокусное расстояние. Здесь как 8 сантиметров вот, до предмета. Длина предмета это 3 сантиметра. Вот. И я сейчас должен лучи световые по всем законам правильно воспроизвести. Вот этот проходит через фокус, а который проходит через оптический центр, он идет. И пересечение этих лучей есть изображение. Я потом уже мерю вот это изображение и пишу сюда ответ. Но что видит учитель? Я закончил. Вот сейчас уже я ничего не... Вот у меня руки свободны. И сама программа показывает каждое мое действие. И этим очень легко определить. Может быть, ученик допустил ошибку, значит, механическую. Или он особенно креативный, что-то какой-то новый нашел или что-то такое. Понимаете, полностью можно понять, настолько он разбирается в этом вопросе.
Давид, скажите, пожалуйста, эта симуляция, она фокусируется на более общих предметах.
Да.
Какие возможности вы видите для применения аналогичных симуляторов для профессиональных предметов и курсов профессионально-технического образования? Не могли бы вы, может быть,
Ну, вот, то, что было сделано мною по заказу. Механик, электромонтер, электрик, меня делает холодильное оборудование, фруктов и овощей, производство промышленности. Вот эти симуляторы, они связаны, и как вот помните, я вам рассказывал, с реальной виртуальной лабораторией. Один вариант это в виртуальном мире ты делаешь, потом тебе программа оценивает, а потом ты уже с реальными объектами, которые связаны непосредственно уже с компьютером, ты видишь все свои действия и получаешь оценки.
Какую реакцию обучающиеся на эти симуляторы?
Ученики, которые таким образом обучаются, они побеждают конкурс. У них уже совершенно другие навыки. Они уже практически могут реализовать свое знание. Главное. Одно получить знание, потом зачем я обучился, если я не могу его использовать. Самое главное вот это. И эти программы как раз этому и помогают. Научить меня мыслить, научить меня действовать и свои теоретические знания реализовать в реальном мире. Вот самое главное.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо,
Спасибо вам.
Maria, over to Yelin.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Professor Songulashvili, for the very interesting interview and showing this simulation to us. And I think the last example might have been cheese making. I don't know, to me it looks like it, but I'm not a cheese maker. You showed very well like how a simulation can provide immediate feedback and also how it stimulates students to try again when they are making mistakes. We also saw in the chat that there are some, and we noticed it ourselves, there are some technical issues with the sound. So I would now like to use this moment to ask you a question, Professor, if you're ready. And that gives us some time to solve the issue, and hopefully it will work out with the next examples. I saw that there was one question about who had been making these simulations. I think you all made them, but maybe you can react on that as well. And another question I would like to ask is, you showed us that students will get new assignments when they are making mistakes to try it again. And also that teachers can see exactly what the student has been doing. But what happens if a student really doesn't understand the topic, so keeps making mistakes? Is the concept, the theory explained in the simulation, or does the teacher have to follow the progress and follow up? So what happens if the student really faces some difficulties in the chat? Jolien, over to Professor Songulashvili.
Добрый день. Я объясню, как там. Значит, перед тем, как вот эта программа, которую я демонстрировал, до этого другая программа работает, которая все это объясняет и приводит примеры. Там было всего 6 минут, за 6 минут я не смог уложиться, чтобы показать все, и поэтому там начало не было вырезано, и поэтому не смогли заметить, как там делается. Значит, сперва происходит демонстрация, объяснение всего, он может потом вернуться назад и снова просмотреть и проследить за своими ошибками, потому что программа не только исправляет, но она и указывает, какая была допущена ошибка. Вот это самое главное. Вот здесь. Автор я этих программ, вы задали вопрос. Симуляторов.
Можно вопрос?
Да-да.
Ольга, Республика Беларусь.
Да-да.
Профессиональное образование мы занимаемся. Мы также создавали свои симуляторы для определенных машин и также действий. Это электротехника тоже была очень похожая у нас. Скажите, пожалуйста, эти симуляторы вы пишете самостоятельно? То есть
да.
Это как среда какая? Среда
да.
какая? В какой среде вы пишете вот это?
Там разное бывает. Там, данный симулятор, который я демонстрировал, это ActionScript 3. Но есть продолжение всего. Самое главное, что эти симуляторы связаны с реальным миром. Они имеют два свойства. Один просто, значит, вы можете производить опыты только в виртуальном мире, но потом есть специальное переключение, и эти симуляторы связываются уже с реальными объектами и данные, которые они получают с реальных объектов.
То есть
вот,
даже у них...
Это есть универсальность этих симуляторов, что два...
Я поняла, да.
Виртуальная, реально виртуальная лаборатория.
Я согласна. Теперь вот это ваша фишка такая, что согласна, что сначала он проходит, симулятор идет виртуальный, вы тренируетесь, а потом его можно переподключить к реальному оборудованию. И уже на нем,
вот он
выставив те указания, те критерии, вы можете собрать либо...
I'm sorry, I think this is a very interesting discussion, but we also have a limited time, and I would like to have time for the next examples.
Excuse
me. So we will be able to continue discussion maybe after we've shown all the examples, or otherwise on ETF Open Space, where we will also show all the examples, all the videos again. But now I would really like to move on to the next example, which also shows how the pandemic influenced the use of formative assessment. And the next example is supported by the Skills for Job project of Swiss Contact in Albania. And we will hear about the solutions Floria Bega, teacher of economics at the Technical Economics School in Tirana, introduced to monitor progress of her students, but also to motivate them. And we are also very lucky to have Irea Mati, one of her students, with us today, who will share her experiences. Maria, we are very curious, so please go ahead. Jolien, over to Maria.
Thanks a lot, Yulin. And my first question will be to Irea, the student from Albania. Irea, due to the pandemic, your school was closed and you received distance education. What new tools and activities did your teacher introduce to help you with the learning on a distance and to help you to progress with your study?
During the lockdown period of COVID-19, our teacher would be in touch with us every day through WhatsApp or Zoom. We are working on class groups in WhatsApp mostly. In order to check for understanding, we used the question, our teachers used question and answer or regular online quizzes, sometimes homeworks which were timed, sometimes in groups, sometimes individual homeworks. Another way that our teachers use will also direct question during Zoom seasons. So this was a way of learning during the lockdown period.
Lori, why did you develop these activities and why have you started to use these tools? And which were the most successful and the most useful for you?
During the lockdown pandemic, the school switched abruptly from being fully face-to-face to being fully online. So we had to adapt very quickly in order to continue the learning and the teaching and process in order to support the learning, but also to do that in a way that we relieved and eased the stress and all the anxiety that was present very strongly, not only in us, but also in our students' lives. Me and my colleagues, we try to find interesting and motivating ways to continue the learning process of our students. During the first period, we created WhatsApp groups and we started to send assignments through PowerPoints that included homework and activities for different levels of students, from the most challenged ones to the more advanced ones, in order to ensure that they continued the swift learning process.
We've discussed WhatsApp and online quizzes. So what tool was most useful for you and why?
In order to make sure that the students continue their learning process, we had to find ways to also ensure formative assessment. And the formative assessment was much more focused on the learning rather than just making sure to get the grade. We already knew our students very well and we knew where they were at. So the activities that were being created were, first of all, interesting and intriguing, so that that they would be included and they would enjoy doing these activities. And they will have different levels of requests. One of the ways I did it was to time the activities so that the more advanced students would give the answer in a timing period, so they would be motivated by getting a grade. I would also offer creative activities like now I'm remembering this theme of protecting the consumer. And what I asked them was to just express in a creative way how do they understand this concept. So some students send me an essay, some others do a design or send a painting. In order to make sure that all the students were involved, I would make sure that each session had also a repetition opportunity. So the students would at least give back a wrap-up of what was developed and presented prior to the session. That meant that this was an opportunity to express the concept, the main concept, with their own wording, and that is very important for vocational education, because that means that the concept has been grasped and you can see in a short period. For example, I use the activity such as elevator pitch, that they have to repeat what were the main concept in the lesson in 5, not more than 2 to 3 minutes, as long as an elevator trip takes. This way, it was not very difficult to understand whether the students were on track or not, and if the students would not be performing as I already expected them to be performing, I would be contacting them often.
Thanks a lot, Lori. So my next question is again going to be to Irea. So what was your experience with these activities? What do you think about using WhatsApp for learning? And what was your reaction when you saw that WhatsApp could be actually used for learning? And how did it help in the learning process? Irea.
Yeah. Online learning wasn't that easy. First of all, I was a little bit scared how it would be. When we started, it started to be a little bit tiresome and sometimes stressful. But what was very useful for us was that we were in a continuous contact with our teachers. We could write on them any time of the day, and they were very understanding and try to explain us everything that wasn't that clear, even if eventually. This was very helpful for us. And I think this way of learning was successful. We get all the information that we need.
Thank you, Lord. And last question to you: what did you and what did the students do with the feedback that they received from these different practices and these different tools? And how did you use this feedback for further learning process?
During the pandemic lockdown, things depended on the level of the classroom. I presented different tools depending on the level of the students that I was teaching. And the most important thing for me was to make sure that the students felt supported. And what happened was that I was with them not just in the teaching period, I was with them the whole day. And that showed me I really enjoyed the responsibility and eagerness to be involved from all the students. And to tell you the truth, I felt much more connected with my students during that period rather than when we were in the classroom, because usually we just go and teach and then we might not see the kids until the next hour. While during the lockdown, we were in touch all the time. In a classroom happens that some students don't speak unless asked. And this was not the case during the quarantine, because they will be involved and show that they were interested in the learning and they were part of the classroom and sending messages. So that made sure that the learning process continued even better than what I expected at the beginning of the quarantine.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Lori. Irea, good luck with your studies. I really hope
Thank you.
you will enjoy it as you do now. Lori, good luck with all your innovative practice and keep up good work. And Maria, over to Jolene.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Flori and Irea, for sharing your solutions and experiences during these challenging times. And I think that many of the participants here today can relate to those experiences. I think your examples show that maybe during these times, it was even more important to feel connected, to stay connected with your students, and to create a safe and motivating learning environment. We've seen in the presentation of Janet that this learning environment is a very important aspect, the starting point to start with formative assessment. And Floria, you were also talking about creativity in the assignments, but I think you showed creativity yourself by coming up with all these different kinds of assignments to monitor the progress of your students, but also to motivate them and encourage them. I think we will move on to the next example. We will do questions after this round. I see there are already a couple of questions, but we will show one other example, and then we will have time for questions for both examples. So we will go to the third example, coming from Spain. And it's part of an Erasmus Plus project, VET 4.0, and we will have Sergio Banderas with us today. He's an IT VET teacher at IES Campanillas, and he has also been awarded with VET Teacher of the Year award in Spain. And he will share his experiences with the project Plant Irrigation, part of this bigger Erasmus project. And also he will explain us more about the role of formative assessment in this project. So Sergio, please share your project and experiences with us. Jolien, over to Sergio.
Hello, very good morning. First of all, thanks a lot to Jolene to inviting me to this very interesting formative assessment webinar. It's a great opportunity for us to share our project, Plant Irrigation, related with Industry 4.0 and vocational education. So for us, it's really, really a good opportunity to share this experience. So now I'm going to show you our presentation, okay? I'm going to share the screen. Okay. So I'm going to talk about this project that it is in a Erasmus Plus project, K20. This is the index of what I'm going to talk about in this presentation. We are going to talk very fast about the project, who we are, our PET school, this project, how we work in a collaborative way with the students. Also, we are going to talk about the methodology we used for learning, teaching, and also related with the formative assessment. We have a small testimony of one of our students, and at the end I'm going to tell you what this project get in our school, because we are now working in new projects and we are using what we learned in this project. So as I told you, this plant irrigation project is within the VET 4.0 project. It's Erasmus Plus K20. These are the partners, coordinated also by a EU agency. Who we are? We are IES Campanillas. We are a VET school. We are bilingual and VET dual system. We have these specialties, the telecommunication, IT, software development, some of them. And we are located at a very big technology park in Andalusia, where we are surrounded by around 600 IT companies, where are 2,000 workers, mostly all of them in the IT world. So we are very lucky because mostly all of our students get a job after finishing their studies. Okay, this project, Plant Irrigation, it was a great opportunity for us in this Erasmus Plus project, because we could work in lots of different specialties with teachers, different teachers of different classes and different students. So it also was a real project that we implemented at our school in the classroom of handicapped students. we could put this garden app, because it's a garden app that is managed by web and mobile. It's a great, they get data constantly, so the students can irrigate the plants, can see the humidity, can see the temperature, and can take a lot of data. What the students have learned with this project, and also teachers, are a lot of Industry 4.0 skills, like Internet of Things, as we use a lot of sensors that take data and uploaded it to the cloud computing, to the cloud database. We also use some 3D printing devices for the camera, and for other things. We also use 360 camera to use our virtual reality glasses to see the garden at real time. And also we implemented a layer of security and network, as it is outside the school with the Wi-Fi, and we wanted that it was secure. Here is a picture of the students working in the electronic and software development team. Other students of the school were preparing the garden, and here one student handicapped was looking and helping also in the installation. Okay, about collaborative tools, we have worked with several collaborative tools like GitHub, Google Drive, GitKraken, Visual Studio Code, and Trello. They were related with our main communicate tool called Slack, with boots, automatically boots. It was notified every change in every of these tools. GitHub is where our students upload the code, so we can see every time, every moment, what students are doing in our project. Also with Trello, it's connected with GitHub and with Slack, so at every time, every moment, we teachers can see the real state of the project, and it's very, very helpful. This scheme of tools is not something new we invented. It's the scheme that it is used in most of the IT companies. So we are also using what they use in the IT companies after studies. This way of working was very useful at this coronavirus lockdown. So because we continue using this way, and it's very helpful. With this project, we work in project-based learning methodology. So we can, the communication between students and teacher were very, very fluent. We encourage students to have initiative, to add own features, because this is an open project and they can add some features, and this also encourage self-learning, because they have to look and to research how they do that. Of course, with this initiative, it's also related with creativity, as with this base, they create new solutions for future projects. Talking about formative assessment, the way we evaluate all these projects timeline in the life cycle of the project. For example, when they were developing with code, they uploaded, as I told you, with GitHub. So we can see at any time how many lines of code and what was the code that each student uploaded, and that was for us as a very, very powerful tool to our formative assessment. Also with the testing, we have results, document results. Also with the deployment, we have web server and APK file, so we could see who uploaded the final project. With documentation, technical and user manual, we have all this information as formative assessment. And also at the end of the project, students did their presentation where they developed very good communication skills. That was also used at formative assessment. I'm going to put very quickly 1 minute student testimony, Denise Burgos.
This plant irrigation project gave me and the rest of the students of my class the opportunity to learn and combine all the new technologies and see the result at a real project. We basically learned how to develop web pages where we could switch on and off lights and get data from sensors connecting to Arduino or Raspberry Pi. And then we upload this data to the cloud database, and then we also create a mobile app to interact with this sensor and data. The good thing about this collaborative project at class is that we use the same environment that it is used at the IT companies. It was very helpful for us working this way.
Okay, so This is my last slide. This experience gave us a great knowledge to students and also to teachers to start new projects. In the last year, we did 2 video game projects between primary education students and vocational education. But we use the same collaborative tools, we use the same methodology, project-based learning, and also with more value, we encourage STEM girls at early years, as it was also with primary school students. We also did a great job of pet orientation as we work together, students from vocational and primary. It was a way of showing them what vocational education is in a real project. Thanks a lot to, as I told you, gracias, to give us this great opportunity to show what we did in this very interesting Embed Zero project. So thanks for your attention. We go back with Jolene. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio, for sharing this interesting project with us. And I think it also shows how formative assessment is an integrated part of learning, where you provide continuous feedback and use different activities to monitor progress, but also encourage collaborations and encourage students to come up with their own solutions. I also remember from our conversation, like you mentioned, this code was a very important aspect, as by uploading it, you could always see their progress and provide feedback, but also the code itself would provide immediate feedback, like it would be working or it would not. I would like to use this time to have two short questions, because we still need time for the last example as well. And we can always use at the end a bit more time for questions. But I would like to start with Floria or Gerda. I don't know who of you will answer the question, but there was a question about grading. I think here with formative assessment, we said that it's more about feedback and providing useful feedback, but I think you also had a solution for grading. And what other resources besides WhatsApp, online resources, did you use? So I would like you to pass the floor to Floria or Gerda. Jolien, over to Albania.
Thank you so much. I will be presenting. I discussed both questions with Floria. In order to gain time, I will speak directly in English, so that we don't waste precious time. So the first question, very, very important question, is about grading. Grading is something that is by law, we have to grade at the end of the period. So what we did was we kept these low stake assessments, which were very frequent, and the student knew what was going on. They had the opportunity to improve what they hadn't done as correctly as was before. So it was the opportunity to support the students learning continuously. We had the opportunity to already know our students. It was March, so we had all that period that we already knew our students very well. So we kind of kept the same profile and the same pace in grading at the end of the day, but they knew that their assessments were also part of this grading at the end of the school year. So it was a formative assessment. It was not just learning activities. There were some learning activities that had no grading, but because this mentality of assessment is very much ingrained in our students and in our culture, and grading does specify whether a student will continue to higher education and continue with their career, grading is very important. So we did not want to give up grading completely, because that would mean that they wouldn't be as motivated to participate. So that was about the grading. And your other question was about what kind of platforms you use. With the project Skills for Job, we have a Moodle platform called Mosovet.al. And in this platform, there are opportunities, as the Moodle has, that our students could upload assignments, and we could upload, share resources and information, and that was
a way to communicate with them. Of course, we use synchronous platforms such as Zoom and Google Forms, but so that had already these kind of quizzes, opportunities to at least measure whether the concept had been grasped or not. So that was about the platforms. And prior to Sergio's presentation, you asked about creativity, and I pushed, Floria, I'm talking on her behalf now, pushed for opportunities to use ready-made materials that were at home. Like if the assignment was, she is a teacher in economics, as you said at the beginning, they had to develop a commercial. So they could find materials and stuff in their homes and create a commercial or create a label for a specific product. So she would really push for concepts that allowed students to get a bit off screen time and be creative and use their imagination and creativity to motivate students to be involved in their learning.
Okay, thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for the very complete answer. I would also like, Sergio, one question, and then we will have time for the last example. Sergio, there's also a question about what you mean by group projects or group work. And I think it's also interesting if you could say a bit more about how the students collaborated in Slack, where they were helping each other. So how you use the group work and the collaboration as well for students to provide feedback to each other and help each other forward. Yulien, over to Sergio.
Hello. Well, we work in this project and other projects, as I told you, in a collaborative way, simulating and trying to do the same that they do at companies. I mean, at companies, everybody works in teams. I am more related with IT companies, where I've been working years ago in IT companies, and now my students do the internships in those companies. And in mostly every company, they work in groups. And we are simulating this scenario to our class. How we do it? Slack is a collaborative tool so they can create channels. It's like a WhatsApp, but more professional, much more professional, because they can create their own channels. So we distribute, because the project has different parts in the way that, for example, testing, the installation, the design, the mobile app, the web app. So every part has a channel, and in each part there are several students, and they can talk about by themselves without interrupting other people. So the communication is more fluid and more transparent. So, and also they can share documents, and also they are informed because it is connected with Trello and connected with GitHub. GitHub is the platform where we upload all the code. They are code repositories. So every time the student is working on the code, it is uploading, and then in each channel, depending what part of the project is, they can see what they have done. So this is really, really useful, and is the way that in IT companies they do it, the work very productive, because they can handle in which part they are, which student has worked what have they done. So it's really, really useful, and everything is connected. So in this time, for example, because of the pandemic, we have been working this same way, and it was very, very useful, and they can work at home with no problem, continue with the project. The only problem we have is when we are uploading code, the same file of the code. Two persons, they have to do one thing that is called merge files. So merge file is when two pieces of codes has to merge. So at that point, at the beginning, they were a little more confused, but once they do it several times, they can handle very well. So this is a collaborative, it's like they work in groups, and for teachers, it's very useful also because we can see the state at any time how the work is doing. So back to Jolene.
Thank you, Sergio. I think you explained how you created a more like authentic learning environment, but also how the tools help students, but also help you as a teacher to see what they are doing and how they are progressing. So thank you very much for this reply. We will have to go to the last example, but not last but not least, let's say. We have an example from Tunisia, and it's focusing on one of the European key competences. And I think this is also interesting. A question was raised about it at the beginning during Janet's presentation as well. This example is also part of an ETF project, an ETF integrated approach to promote entrepreneurial learning in Tunisia from 2015 to 2020. And when working on these key competences, often the question is raised, like, how do we assess it? And in this project, they came up with several tools, activities for formative assessment. And we have Naila Barkati, trainer at the Tunisian Vet Agency, and her former intern, Jeanne Ameur, present here, who will explain more about one of the tools they created, a self-assessment tool. And this time it will be my colleague Alistair who is doing the interview. Dus Jolien, over to Alistair.
Vous êtes toutes les deux prêtes à partir. Donc, j'ai deux questions pour vous, Najla. Et j'ai une question, or I'm going to have a question in English for you, Jihan. So if we can just start with the first question for you, Najla. Maintenant, nous allons parler d'auto-évaluation, donc projet sur l'esprit entrepreneurial. Quel a été le but de ce projet et quel a été le rôle de l'auto-évaluation dans ce
la question. Je voudrais d'abord apporter une précision concernant la notion d'esprit entrepreneurial. Il s'agit en effet d'une façon de penser et d'agir. L'esprit entrepreneurial permet notamment de prendre des risques mesurés, de penser de façon créative et d'être dans l'apprentissage continu. L'État tunisien, en fait, voudrait promouvoir cet esprit au niveau de toutes les structures qui accueillent les jeunes, que ce soit des universités ou des centres de formation. L'objectif de ce projet qui est conduit en étroite collaboration entre le ministère de la formation professionnelle et le gouvernement. Donc, depuis des années déjà, cet enseignement a eu lieu dans les centres de formation professionnelle avec des programmes différents. La question d'évaluation du niveau, du degré d'acquisition de cet esprit entrepreneurial s'est alors imposée. Durant l'année écoulée, une expérimentation sur l'auto-évaluation a eu lieu dans notre centre de formation professionnelle. Donc, on envisage bien entendu de continuer cette expérience avec les nouveaux stagiaires pour les années prochaines.
Et donc, au sein du projet, on a compris le but, mais quel a été le rôle de l'auto-évaluation au sein du projet?
Voilà, l'auto-évaluation, en fait, c'est d'évaluer le degré d'acquisition de ces apprentissages. Il est certes très intéressant de fournir des compétences, mais le plus important, c'est d'évaluer est-ce que ces compétences ont été réellement acquises par les apprenants ou pas. C'est ça le rôle de l'évaluation.
Merci. Et donc, est-ce que vous pourriez nous raconter comment s'est déroulée cette évaluation étape par étape?
Donc, cette expérimentation, en fait, a eu lieu avec 20 apprenants qui sont âgés entre 20 et 25 ans pendant une durée de 3 ans. Ça s'est déroulé en 3 étapes. La première, c'est une présentation des compétences entrepreneuriales, les 15 compétences du référentiel européen Entrecamp. Par la suite, en deuxième étape, on a eu un auto-positionnement des apprenants par rapport aux compétences entrepreneuriales en utilisant des smileys. Ça veut dire qu'on a fourni aux apprenants une grille avec les 15 compétences et l'étudiant devrait s'auto-évaluer par rapport à chacune de ces compétences en utilisant les smileys. Donc, il y a le sourire, bien entendu, ça veut dire j'ai cette compétence. Il y a le deuxième niveau sceptique, je ne sais pas. Et le troisième niveau, je n'ai pas cette compétence. Donc, on avait une grille avec 3 niveaux. Troisième phase, on a eu les discussions et les feedbacks entre les apprenants sur la pertinence de l'auto-positionnement. De ces discussions, le formateur était un modérateur pour permettre aux apprenants de s'exprimer librement et de prendre conscience de leur évaluation grâce au retour de leurs camarades. En résumé, le formateur oriente l'apprenant à évaluer ses compétences en tenant compte de son vécu, ses expériences passées et en cherchant des preuves factuelles. Donc, a permis de conscientiser le processus d'apprentissage et de responsabiliser les apprenants par rapport à leur auto-évaluation. Le débat était très riche et très constructif. Par exemple, un stagiaire va s'auto-évaluer avec la note 3. Ça veut dire « je n'ai pas assez de compétences ». Lors de la discussion, ses camarades lui disent « non, lors de l'expérience telle qu'elle était, tu as manifesté cette compétence et donc votre notification, elle n'est pas la bonne. Nous, on va vous noter avec la meilleure note de 5. » Donc, ces discussions étaient très, très riches et ça a permis aux stagiaires d'être beaucoup plus conscients par rapport à son auto-évaluation.
Voilà, une réponse très complète et aussi avec un peu de sentiment de la réalité vécue de l'expérience. Donc,
voilà.
So, Xian, what was your experience of the auto-evaluation and what did you learn from the experience?
For me, it was a pleasure to get to know several things about myself. I might skip or to my journey. At first, that's what I liked about the experience. Society made us think that all that matters is about academic skills. Nowadays, things have changed, and it was for that for me. I was able to get through the experience on the assessment day. Today, I crossed the bridge from learning life to professional life through opportunities. Weird how I had the courage to take such a risk and still appreciate how easy it was for me. I took a risk to jump and explore a new field after having a diploma in quality control in agro-food industries, but now I'm working in a consulting agency and we are leading statistical surveys and marketing studies. Things, they're all new for me. I think too, we all went through a lot as a student, from self-esteem issues, from lack of visibility through the future and professional life. But today, I strongly believe that being a brilliant social and professional human being is never about what you carry with you from your academic skills. Okay, it's still important for us all, but it's mainly about how you see and value success. It's about sustainable thinking and ethical one, simply because that's what you can bring into any field, no matter what is different from your academic learning. That's what will add value to everyone around us. Last but not least, I would never miss a chance to know more about myself, because we need to spot our needs and skills to be efficient to our path. That's what I learned mainly from that day.
Okay.
Thank you. Au revoir.
Merci, Naila, Jihan. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée. Au revoir.
Thank you.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
You have to switch on your microphone.
Now I'm back. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Naila, and thank you, Zien, for sharing this very interesting example. I also see in the chat that you mean that you receive many compliments, and also on YouTube there was a comment that they said, can we transfer this project also to our school? It's very creative. So I would like to share these compliments. And I think the example also shows not only the power of self-assessment, but also the power of peer feedback. The discussion you had afterwards was very interesting. And it also shows that you as a teacher don't always have to provide the feedback, but as a teacher, you can create the environment where students can assess themselves or assess their peers. So a very interesting example. We also would like to mention that all the information on the project is available on ETF Open Space, and we will share the link in the chat and also later on the event page of this event. We have a question. The question is like how students are different. Is this how did it work maybe with weaker students or students who found it difficult to do such an exercise? Naila, could you explain how it works, how this exercise works for different types of students? Naila, you're online?
Oui, je suis là. Merci pour vos retours. Ça nous fait énormément plaisir. De la Tunisie, donc de la formation professionnelle. J'adresse mes remerciements à toutes les personnes qui sont présentes parmi nous aujourd'hui. Donc, par rapport aux élèves, en fait, qui n'ont pas ces compétences entrepreneuriales, le formateur, dès le début de la séance, il a insisté sur le fait que par rapport aux compétences entrepreneuriales, l'apprentissage, c'est un processus. Et c'est un voyage et chacun effectue ce voyage selon son rythme. Mais il est nécessaire d'avoir des évaluations régulières, des auto-évaluations, en tenant compte, bien entendu, du feedback ou des retours de ses collègues, de ses enseignants. Donc, dès que le cadre était très, très bien mis dès le début, donc même les stagiaires qui n'ont pas ces compétences étaient vraiment très à l'aise pour partager leur auto-positionnement.
Thank you, Naila, for this answer and the emphasis like on regular formative, like on regular self-assessments. I think we are also coming already at the end of the webinar. We have many, still many questions. We don't have enough time right now to answer all the questions, but maybe it's good to see what we will be doing next as well. For sure, we will try to get back to those questions on ETF Open Space, but we also have follow-up events, and I'm sharing my PowerPoint again. Yes. So I think, yeah. And we will skip this part for now because we had very interesting discussions. But what we would like to share is, I think we have seen today, like how these different examples, different forms of assessment are used in different contexts, and also that teachers are important, like they prepare the context, but it's not always the teacher him herself who needs to provide the feedback. Sometimes you can use programs like we saw on in the simulations. You can keep in contact a lot, like the continuous feedback was emphasized, I think, both in the Spanish and Albanian case, and the Albanian case also showed the different examples, like in this challenging situation. And then we saw this example also from Tunisia, where students were really, but also was partly in the Spanish example, where students were giving feedback to each other and helping each other and also assessing themselves. In the next webinars, we would like to focus again on summative assessment, and maybe also slightly discuss, like, can we use formative assessment for summative decisions, or what is summative assessment and how can we organize it? And here we would like to look back as well on the webinar we had in May last year. So we will reflect on the end of year assessment and learn from the experiences and look forward to what will this mean for the summative assessment in the future. What we saw today is that there was a lot of interaction. We were not able to answer all questions or to raise all questions, but we are thinking about organizing some interactive online events. So if you are interested, please let us know in the chat, and also let us know what kind of topics you would like to discuss, because we are aware that these webinars, we have a lot of examples, we share a lot of examples, but there's not so much time for interaction. So we would like to create smaller events with a limited number of people where we can really discuss with each other what is assessment, what is formative assessment, and what is summative assessment, and how can we organize it. We will also share later this year a paper on formative and summative assessment on ETF Open Space. And for now, I would just like to thank all presenters today for sharing their experiences and examples and reflections with us, and also all participants, because you stayed with us until the end. And I think we had a great number of participants, and thank you for sharing your ideas, suggestions, and questions. Before you leave us, one last question. We will share a link to a survey in the chat, and we would really like you to fill the survey. It's a short survey, I think only 6 questions, and it will help us to also prepare the next webinar. So your feedback is very much appreciated. So then I think the only thing I need to do is to wish you a very good rest of the day, and we hope to see you during the next webinar. And in the meantime, please stay connected with us on ETF Open Space, where we share all the materials and where we